welcome back, everyone. Welcome, Mary Sue.
Hello. Hi, Sally.
Hi, thanks so much for being on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we are going to be talking about juniors starting the process because, hint, it's not too early. That's
No.
been the theme a little bit. That's the theme actually for every segment today. It's not too early to start talking about um, paying for college and who's going to do it. It's not too early to start talking about summer programs. And now it's not too early in January for juniors to start thinking about
Yep.
beginning the process. So let's kind of let's sort of kick off the process for them. I mean, we're going to be
Mhm,
going into a lot of these individual elements in more detail. So,
mhm.
our purpose today is going to be to give kind of a broader overview. And I know that you are particularly well placed for this because
Right.
you have a student in college. So, you have been through the process already. And
Yep.
you also have a student who has, I know you have been taking that student on a lot of visits already. So, you
Yep.
actually began already. So,
Yep.
what are some words of advice as both a professional in this field
Mhm.
and a parent?
Yeah. So one tip is that just because I'm a professional in this field does not mean that my daughter believes anything that I say in this space. So I'm sure many parents who listen in can resonate with that and think about that even though you're the parent, you're not the expert kind of thing. So I mean, yes. So I have a high school junior in my household, and she is full on in the process. And we're sort of thinking about first kind of what type of next environment might serve her best. And so just to kind of give a little bit of a broad timeline of the year, is that what I should do, Sally? Is that does that sound good for you?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay. So a broad timeline of the year is I think we first started with kind of just thinking about the type of school that she wants for her next step and how does she actually learn best. There things that are must-haves, nice to haves, deal breakers as she's considering college. Maybe must-haves might be a certain type of major for some students. Other students, they don't have that major yet. They don't know what they want to go into. And so maybe the must-have is someone at the college who would provide great advising, career counseling kind of supports for a student perhaps that is undecided.
Hmm.
So we talked about what kind of environment might fit her best, how far from home, location of like a city or suburban or rural environment. And some of these things are not instant answers. Sometimes the student needs to kind of think about it, which is really where I think the visit comes in really nicely. And so I would say the first part of this year, doing some of that research, maybe getting out to visit a school, just going at first to kind of some local schools is totally fine. You
Hmm.
don't actually have to think about it initially as um what is this the perfect fit for them on every measure, but just to kind of see the types of schools that are out there. So start by researching, maybe go out to visit some schools. It's always eye-opening to me to accompany students on on visits because they notice things, even though I've been doing this a long time,
Hmm.
they notice things that I never would have noticed and kind of can pick up some things that may become important or not to them in the process. So I think initial part of the year is thinking about what the student wants that next step to be. Certainly, this is also a time of year when high schools might start asking about course selection for senior year. So, sort of planning your academic path through senior year to finish out your high school years. That's going to come up pretty soon.
Hmm.
Um, One thing I tell all the juniors that I work with to think about, even now in January, is think about what teachers you might ask for letters of recommendation
Hmm.
at the end of this year. And the reason that I say it now is that um, if you really haven't been that vocal of a student in the classroom or you're like, I don't know who I could ask, there's still time. There's still time to perhaps, engage a little bit more in class or be able to develop a bit more of a rapport with some teachers so that you can feel comfortable at the end of the year asking them for that recommendation. And
Mhm.
as you mentioned, summer program planning is coming up right now too. So that's another thing to kind of think about in that first half of the year. So I'll kind of pause there. That's sort of the first half of the year. But it sometimes feels like, oh, wait, it's new year and there's a lot suddenly that comes up for the juniors that
Mhm.
maybe they weren't anticipating. So
Yeah, I want to say too that there are concrete steps. It's so easy for the time to go by. One of the things that I recommend doing is get a copy of your school calendar, figure out the days that you're going to have off, and
yeah,
start to book those visits. And I do
yeah.
also want to specify that when we're talking about visits, we're talking about official visits.
Hmm.
I talked to a parent yesterday, and she said, "Well, we've gone to some games." And I'm like, "That's great, but if you're just going to the games, every school is gonna seem wonderful, right?" Like, you need to see how they talk about the academics and the environment outside of the games as well.
Hmm.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, like, do the official tour.
Hmm.
What about testing? I mean, I think
Hmm.
that's something else to think about too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I would say it's particularly for students who are current juniors, a particularly challenging, I won't say challenging time for testing, but sort of there's a lot changing in the testing world. I guess I'll put
Mhm,
it that way. The SAT is moving from the paper-based test to the digital test. The first administration of that digital test will be in March of 2024. And so for some of the juniors, they're a little bit, oh, what do I do now? This is a new test and how do I study for it? They have already taken probably the digital PSAT in
mhm,
October, and probably you got your results back from that digital PSAT, and you can kind of assess where the student is from that digital test that they already took and where they are maybe shooting for colleges that they might be interested in. So spring is a good time to plan and to perhaps take their SAT, or if they want to not deal with the digital piece, they can always take the ACT. From an admissions perspective, we didn't really care.
mhm,
But I think getting some testing, at least a first test done in the spring of junior year, is a great goal. Even better if you can get all the testing done in the spring of junior year. But at least starting that testing process is a really good thing to put
mhm.
on that to-do list for the first half of the year.
Yeah, and I will say if you can't, not a problem. There's still
Yeah.
August, there's still October, or in the
Mhm.
case of the ACT, September, etc.
Mhm.
So, but
Yeah.
yeah, definitely having it on the radar. So, what do you think? I feel like I want to go back to the college visits
Mhm.
and kind of understanding the college a little bit more. What do you think are things that they should really look at? And again, we're going to go into this in more detail, but for
Mhm.
anybody who maybe doesn't have a chance or is booking visits already,
Right.
like what are some of the things for them to think about? How do they identify those deal breakers, must haves, other than the obvious one? Really easy to say this is urban, this is suburban, etc. Really easy to find out if a school has a particular major, but like let's kind of go beyond that a little.
Yeah. So I think, and some of, I can't stress enough how much to kind of get out in the visits, because I think some of that doesn't really crystallize for a student until the student has one or two visits to compare in their mind against. But, I think thinking first about the academics. So the major piece is going to be a big factor for some students. In the case of my student, she has a very particular major in mind that is not offered at every type of college, and so that made her college list very narrow very quickly. But part of our conversation was, are you sure you want this narrow major?
Mhm.
Or do you want to broaden out a little bit? And so after a visit or two and talking to some people in that field, it reaffirmed for her, yes, I do want this major, and these are the types of schools that I want to look for, which made her search go pretty quickly to a narrow space. Um, but I would say she is a rare unicorn in that way. Most students that we talk to, most students that we work with have no idea what they want to major
Mhm.
in, but they're like, oh, maybe I'm kind of interested in STEM. I like my math and science classes, but I don't know what that means for me. And that's absolutely normal and a perfectly wonderful
Mhm.
place to be in. Or maybe it's a student who's like, I like all my classes, or, ooh, I really know I don't like this. And I sort of like English, but I don't know what to do with an English major. So starting those family conversations of kind of what are your skills, what are your strengths, how might that relate to the college classes that you might want to take?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sometimes it's an opportunity to do a little bit of career counseling. There are some great resources available through the federal Department of Labor that you can take a look at online. If you look up the Department of Labor and some of their materials about career counseling. So I would start with kind of that place and looking at the major, but then also a college experience is about so much more than
Mm-hmm.
just the major and the academics. It's also thinking about um, the living environment there. If there are certain clubs or activities or cultural experiences that the student wants in college, are those apparent? Are those evident on that campus? Are those active on that campus? So those are some of the questions that I start to ask students as they're going to visit, find out about, if having, um, in the case of my daughter, she's a musician. She really, really wanted certain, music experiences at college. And so she started asking, it's not going to be her major, but she started asking about how active the music programs were at the schools that she was looking at. Um, so, I think it's some of those questions that kind of start the process and start writing your kind of like that must have, nice to have kind of deal breaker
Mm-hmm.
pieces. And the deal breakers might be, I don't want this type of climate, whether that is a weather climate or a
Mm-hmm.
certain vibe or sort of
Or
campus climate,
political climate,
political
or yeah.
climate. Yeah, I mean, climate can mean a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I want to go back to the major again too, because one of the things that I run into is students say, "Well, I want to go into business, so I want to major in
mhm,
business."
yeah,
And then I probe a little more deeply, like, "Do you like math?" No. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but this
right.
is this one particular kind of student. Okay, well, some business programs, I'll them tell them require quite a bit of math. Would you
Mhm,
be prepared to do that? And they're like, well, it depends on how much. So I'm
right,
like, great, good to know, good to start
right.
thinking about. Do you know that you can go onto the college's websites and read about what classes are going to be required of you? So I
Yes.
want to really encourage, that's a great thing to start doing, and do it before you've chosen the college, right? Because
Mhm,
some schools will have very math heavy business programs, or
mhm,
whatever the program is. They will actually vary. Programs vary, can vary widely from school to school.
right.
My nephew was going to be a history major. He knew that and he stuck with that. But he chose his college, Gettysburg, partially because he really liked the breadth of what was offered
Mhm,
more than some of the other very fine schools that admitted him.
right.
But he really liked, he said, I want to be able to do all of this and I will be able to do this at this college.
Yeah.
So it was just
Yeah.
pretty exciting that way. So we have
Yeah.
like 1 minute left.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mary Sue.
No problem.
Any last things to kind of mention?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, so I sort of outlined the first half of the year. The second half of the
Mhm,
year, I know we cover many of these topics in the podcast all the time, but second half of the year is really all about getting into the short application list
mhm,
and the essays and the applications. And so really planning ahead in this first half of the year, I think will lead a student to being in a better space and better prepared to do those applications in a good timely fashion over the summer and into the fall.
mhm.
So the more you can plan ahead now, the more less stress you will feel in the second half of the year.
Yeah,
So
keep in
get
mind,
out there.
I'm gonna highlight that, people don't realize, but there can be an advantage to applying to some of these November 1st or sometimes
Mhm.
even earlier deadlines, and they're not binding, most of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But scholarship advantages, so yeah, move get started on this early, it'll be to your advantage, so.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mary Sue.
Thanks for having me, Sally.
All right, and thank you to Amy and Landis as well. Everyone, join us next week for our discussion. We have a headhunter on, and she'll be talking about the job search for college seniors, as well as whether colleges ever withdraw admissions after they have offered it. Hint: occasionally they do, and they always reserve the right to if, say, your grades drop significantly. So listen in on this one. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. You can also listen on Amazon Music or iTunes. And remember, if you're curious about other topics, you can go to our archives. The easiest way to find them is to go to our blog posts on blog.getintocollege.com. You can search for different topics there. And don't forget, we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.